Hello, everyone. I welcome all of you to our spiritual get together, our meeting for the month of August 2024. And thanks to everyone for joining in. So, the topic that we have chosen for today, or as was communicated from the spiritual hierarchy or the spiritual masters, is the sixth root race. So this is a interesting and a complex topic, but to give a brief introduction, you see, uh, the principle actually which lies all images is basically the principle of rise and fall, right? If you look at it, you see our day-to-day experience is also a rise and a fall. Rise means that there is an event or an activity or something, call it an image, right? It rises, right? Rises is appears and then reaches its peak and then slowly dissipates, right? Same is with the spiritual get together as well. We have started this at 10:30 India time, 4 o'clock Australia time, and as we get deeper into it, it reaches its peak, and then by the time it's 5 o'clock, it has subsided. So you see, let's look into our daily schedule. See, we have that awake state, then that's followed by the dream state, and then the deep sleep state, right? And then again, the awake state actually rises, right? Uh, Now focus on, say, the awake state. Now, when you focus on the awake state, it has its own divisions, right? I'll just take one very simple example of consuming food. You have breakfast, and then you have lunch, and then you have afternoon tea, and then you have dinner, right? And each of them are actually unique. Once you have had your breakfast, you're not going to have breakfast at 12 o'clock, it will be lunch, you see. Once you have had lunch, it's not going to be afternoon tea. It's going to be afternoon tea at 4 o'clock, not lunch. And when it is 7:30 or 8 o'clock, it's going to be dinner, not lunch. And then the next day, this cycle repeats. So you see these divisions which are there, this rise and fall which is there, is exactly, this is at the microcosmic level, at the individual level. Now when you translate it to the macrocosmic level, that is, you see, at the evolutionary level, similarly there are these huge cycles of rise and fall, right? And each of these cycles have got their subdivisions. This is the simplest way that I presume could be put to really explain this. So you see, prior to this current huge cycle of evolution of humanity, prior to this we have got what we call as these races, right? Or major epochs, right? So the one prior to this current race is basically the Atlantean period, right? And prior to the Atlantean period was the Lemurian period, and so it goes, right? Now, and the current cycle which is there, or the current epoch which is there, it is the post-Atlantean period, right? Now, each of these periods has actually got seven divisions in them. Just like the day had its breakfast, lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner, and then there's the morning, then the afternoon, then mid-afternoon, then evening. Similarly, each of these, you see, great races or epochs actually have got seven sub races in them or seven sub routes in them. Steiner actually calls these as races, the subdivisions. Rishi Master Byensar do not call these as these races, but that is just chronology. That's just a way of speaking. But basically, what we need to understand is there is this big cycle of evolution, and this is then divided into 7 sub-periods, right? Now, scientifically, it is known, and it's quite interesting that people like Steiner and Rishi Master Benza-Duno had already said that each of these small subdivisions or sub-races is 2,160 years, right? So if we look at the present, which is the post-Atlantean period, already we are the fifth sub-root race, right? Or the fifth sub-race, right? Now, this is actually coming to an end, and some of the figures that were actually given, I'll just quote, these are from Rishi Master Benza-Duno, that from 22nd of March 1914, we have got exactly 300 years, and then the transition will actually start taking place. So the transition means that you see a particular division or a sub-race is brought to a complete end, and then a new race actually starts. So today's topic of discussion is a very important one. It is the sixth race or the sixth sub-root race. Basically, this our current culture will come to a complete end, and then the sixth sub-root race will actually take over. So what is this sixth sub-root race or the sixth race going to be? John Peter will give us an overview of this. It's also called the Golden Age, or it is also called the Age of Purity. There won't be any corruption and all those, but we will go into the detail of that. So thank you for this short introduction. John, would you like to please continue?
But welcome, everybody. I'm glad to have met you. One of the reasons that I've asked where people are coming from was in the sixth root race, or as Beniswa Junov, or the sixth sub-root race, or the sixth sub-epoch, as Steiner calls it, there's going to be a community, spiritual community, which will reach, you might say, the heightening or the highest point of Earth evolution, and from there on, things are going downwards. And this is almost the last chance where people are going to be able to perfect themselves. Because after this period, conditions are going to become so different to anything that we know of that it'll be almost impossible to develop ourselves. So imagine you're in the trenches in Ukraine at the moment, or in the trenches, you're either a Russian or Ukrainian. And imagine, can you do spiritual development whilst the war is being waged around you? The conditions will be so foreign to us that only after the sixth root race, it'd be very difficult to develop spiritually if you haven't made it by that time. I know that sounds extreme, but I'm just told that this is the process. Even though there'll be long periods of Earth evolution afterwards, it'll be extremely difficult to work it. Now, I'm going to share something. I think the best thing is to sort of just go through certain points where people can look at a document, and I'll try and share something, and then I'll go on to Beniswa Junov's document as well. But just to say that it's extremely difficult to be able to look into the future with accuracy. You get different interpretations coming about. So what I ask is whether you're looking at Beniswa Junov or you're looking at Rudolf Steiner, to sort of just try and get a feeling for it, because they come up with different things. Anil mentioned certain dates. I'm going to come up with certain different dates. I'm not saying either is right or wrong. And in the end, the actual reality will be the fruits of whether the dates are correct or not. So initially, I'm going to go into Steiner's interpretation, and then I'm going to go into Beniswa Junov's interpretation, and then just ask you to just form a feeling for what's going to happen. There's commonality, there are differences. So I'm just going to share the screen with something, and let's see what we can come up with. Can everybody see this at the moment? Okay.
Yeah, it's visible, John. It's
Great.
pretty clear.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk through some of these things. You may or may not understand it, so hopefully you do. But one of the, as I said, one of the reasons is we're going to have this spiritual community, and it's going to be all over the world, but it's not necessarily going to be everyone. And I'll get onto that a little bit. And in fact, it probably will be in a minority of the world's population that will actually, I'll use the word, reach this spiritual peak of what Earth evolution is supposed to be about. Um, so one of the things is if we have a bit of a picture of what we can achieve in the future, we can actually plan for it for today. Otherwise, sometimes we're groping in the dark to find out what's this all going to be about. Because even in the immediate future, we could have tough times. Imagine if you're in Ukraine and Russia. As I understand it, there's probably been about 500 lives taken from us, young men fighting each other. And we want to understand what's the purpose of this suffering, because those people are suffering. I'm just presenting a picture. And what we have to do, we have to bear true knowledge of the future, we need to actually strengthen our inner life of capacities. We need to develop capacities to bear this. And we could talk about the practices as given by Ramana Maharishi to abide in self. We strengthen ourselves through these practices, whether it's Rudolf Steiner or Deniswa Junoff, other practices. The idea is to strengthen ourselves because sometimes to bear the future can be a bit depressing, or at least the immediate future. So if I come to this sixth root race, where did this term come from? And obviously Wikipedia is obviously the best source. And so in 1824, someone by the name of Antonio Fabre de Olivet probably was the first one to use this term. Then a person called Helena Blavatsky and Percy Sinnett in his book Esoteric Buddhism took it on, and Steiner then took it on further, and Deniswa Junoff took it on. Now, he calls it the sixth root race, but in actual fact, what I was told, he was referring to what we call the sixth subroot race of our Earth, of our fifth post-Atlantean period. Root race itself is now probably considered inappropriate because it mentions race. It's a strange, but the way it was meant, as Emil said, if we can look at the Earth evolution here in this diagram, we can see that the first essential thing that we can know of our Earth evolution is the Polarian period. This was known as the first root race. The second one is the Hyperborean, Lemurian, Atlantean, post-Atlantean, which is the fifth root race. And in this, we've got the present, and we're called, and this is where individual freedom, I could call it a quality of consciousness soul. We are still to gain this, and this is still to be seen out. And it'll take about another 1,500 years, according to Steiner. Deniswa Junoff says this is going to be closer. Who am I to say which one's correct? But if you notice the star sign here, we're in the sign of Pisces. Now, it's not that we'll be under the sign of Pisces, actually physically, because that will finish, but the effects of Pisces will continue onto a certain time. And when the sixth starts, we'll be in this under the sign of Aries. And this is where common individual wisdom and brotherhood occur. And this is both agreed by Blavatsky, by Steiner, by Deniswa Junoff. So this is what we're going to be concentrating on. Now let's look at our fifth sub-epoch or subroot race, which is the present. According to Steiner, it began in 1413 and will end in 3 573. Pretty accurate. I'm not saying these are correct, but I'm just saying it's right down to the year. And the sixth sub-root race will last from 3,573 to 5,733. And this, if we look at our present influence or major influences, we're looking that they're coming from America, Europe, or the English sort of side of things, where you could say that the technical age and the age of freedom actually arose from these people in the what do I call the English-speaking European races. So that was then, but this age, the sixth root race, will be centered on the Slavic Russian peoples. Now, these things don't have to happen because we have a quality called freedom, and we can actually destroy the earth before these things happen. So there's a possibility, but this is the intent, that these spiritually enlightened people see that should happen from the spiritual world. But it's also an age of decline. Now, I don't know if you've noticed it, but people sort of talk about species of animals declining. And Anil talked about this. We have childhood, we have then adulthood, and then we have a decline to old age, and something new arises, a seed arises from that. And this is happening to our earth. So we're actually in a period of decline, and we actually, it will actually get worse, and the conditions will change, where the earth will become pretty difficult to live in, but we still need to work with this. And I like this, what Anil posted. How can that which is temporary be permanent? That which has to go. Acceptance is the key. So we just have to accept that we're declining, but in this decline, spiritual growth will occur. And that's the important part about it. We've reached the point where we can now take our own spiritual growth into our own hands. Now, the sixth root race, there's always a, let's go back to this diagram. If we look at the Egyptian Chatelain, there's a repetition, a rhythm. There are things that will happen from the Egyptian Chaldean period into the present. And so the sixth root race will be repeat, in a certain sense, light and dark into the sixth race. So this will appear again, but in a new, higher form. So rhythms occur. In the seventh, the ancient Indian civilization, the age of the Vedic traditions, or from where they originated, will be repeated in the seventh. So there's a repetition of this happening. So we can talk about the sixth stage where there'll be a differentiation between good and evil, light and dark. So in this age, it's the task to receive what I call manas, or spirit self. Sorry about the spelling. Our spirit self comes into being. It's a quality of the human being where we consciously transform and ennoble and purify our astral body through our conscious means, and mastering all these unconscious feelings, such as anger, hatred, criticisms, where we're in control of our emotions. We're slowly working on it now. You know, you kind of work when you get in traffic, you sort of start to realize, look, I can be, get angry at the traffic, or I can work on my patience. I can get angry with a person, or I can calmly work with a person. So we're slowly working on it now, and by the sixth stage, we would have achieved much control of our emotions and passions. So what happens, it allows a principle called manas, or spirit self, to enter us, to overshadow us, and we can work from that, where you might say information from those hidden realms will flow into us. Now, there's another quality. I don't know if you notice natural human development today. And if you actually carefully observe human beings today, if they do not work on themselves, things change in the human being, just out of themselves. And today, at the age of 27, this development comes to a close. But what you see, the people can live on to 60, 80, whatever. But if they haven't worked on themselves, they're still at the age of 27. So what they've achieved at the age of 27 will stay with them. But there's a possibility of working with this further. Now, if you go back into history, you notice that old people were revered for their wisdom. And why was this? It was because they naturally, physically developed up until old age, up until the age of 60 or 63. Things just happened because they got older. They became wiser, not out of their own efforts necessarily, but just out of the fact of being a human being of 60, they were wise and they could tell younger people things that the younger people just couldn't get. But these days, we could remain at 27 or even younger, even though we're old. So we got older people can be looked down upon by a lot of younger people, unless we as individuals take up our natural development. But at the beginning of the sixth sub-epoch, it's going to be 21. So people will naturally develop up to 21. And at the end of this age, it'll be 14. And then the development stops unless it's taken in hand. Now, there's an interesting thing. I'm just going to make a statement on this. Natural birth will stop at the end of this period afterwards. Now, I'm making a statement. There's reasons that I'm saying it, because at that time, when we're supposed to have puberty, the development will stop before that. When it stops before that, natural birth will stop. In actual fact, fertility, if you notice in the West, is actually decreasing. I'm just saying it's an observation, but natural fertility will keep on decreasing until at the end of this period, which we're talking about 5,733, natural birth will cease. There'll be other means of birth and continuing humankind. So I'm just trying to give you characteristics of this age. Now, our thoughts. At the moment, we can have any thoughts, and we can have bad thoughts, we can have good thoughts, and nothing will happen. It doesn't matter whether a person hates a person now. Doesn't matter whether a person loves a person now. Not much will happen. You got a trace of this with Ramana, because just his very presence and his thoughts had an effect on people. And that was interesting. So at the end of this period, our thoughts will become nature powers, and purely intellectual thoughts, purely intellectual materialistic thoughts will actually poison the warmth and the air. And we can look forward, and I'm using this in a negative sense, and again, because death's got to occur, we can look forward to ruining plant life and animal life. And nourishment will have to come from what we can call the laboratory. In other words, we've actually got artificial foods now produced in the laboratory today. Not quite what's going to come in the future, but nourishment will have to come from other sources. But also, if we go right into the distant future, the nourishment will come from inside ourselves. But that's the far distant future. And Beneswa Djunoff touches on this. Religion. And that's interesting. You can see a decline in religion in the West today. I think there are many countries, and especially India, religion's still very strong and still very well revered. But in the West, it's just slowly losing its edge. But in this new age, religion as we know it today will no longer be of influence in humanity. It's spirituality that will matter. The spiritual practices, as what we're doing today, need to become widespread. there's another characteristic that will happen. At the moment, if you look at a person, can you tell that they're evil or good? Sometimes no. Sometimes the most evil, horrendous acts are occur by people who look really nice and pleasant. But the physical bodies now closely more resemble the inner being and morality of human beings at the end of this age, at end of that age. So thoughts and feelings will move. Thoughts and morality will happen. Now, as part of our evolution, we are now, you might say, slowly spiritualized. I'm going to go back to this diagram at the moment. This Polarian epoch was all spiritual. There was not necessarily, the closest was, we could say, a repetition of, I've used the word old Saturn, but a previous incarnation of the Earth. Virtually there was nothing physical in this Polarian period. And we'll go back to that. This is what we're heading back. But in the meantime, the most densest period or the most alive period of the Earth was the Atlantean. And we're now in the post-Atlantean and the Earth is dying slowly. But at the same time, human beings are spiritualizing. Gradually, matter is also being prepared to be spiritualized. Now, Christianity, now according to both Rudolf Steiner and Beniswa Juno, and I don't mean the present religions. The present religions will disappear. The Christian religion will disappear. There won't be any traces of it left by the sixth epoch. But Christianity in its true essence, now we can call it by different words. It doesn't really matter. But that'll become understood and experienced as a force within the human being. And this world, or this earth, will be understood and experienced as what we call condensed spirit, or condensed, could I use the term awareness or consciousness, that is condensed spirit or awareness. So that would also be something that will be achieved in the sixth epoch. Christianity as it is known now, you might say, it only points to something, it only preserves something towards the future, but not understood at all. But it needed to have carriers of it, so that's a term that could be used today, but won't be there at the end, at the sixth root race. And so we could say the higher self and our essential being is now experienced as working from outside the body. This is Manas, the Manas principle. And this will be achieved in this sixth sub-epoch. And another quality of everyone, the pain and suffering of others, that will be intensely experienced and will become a social force in forming communities all around the world. Now, these communities, it's not going to be everyone. Because we have freedom, people will still choose to be fully materialistic, fully egotistical, and will consciously choose that pathway for themselves. So in these communities of what I call spiritual communities, and in a sense, and this is why I wanted to sort of know where everyone's coming from, this is kind of a worldwide community. We have people from India, we have people from interstate, and so this is a community that's spread out in what we have here now on the web today. So that's interesting to me, that we have this community even today. Now, so what happens to those individuals who choose the path of egotism and materialism time and time again? Now, people will be given opportunities to choose otherwise, but there will be people who will consciously choose to actually fall into materialism because the egotism satisfied. Now, they'll fall back into what we call a group soul. It's a higher group soul, Animals have a group soul, but this will be a higher form of group soul where they lose their own self-initiative and they are directed how they should think, feel, and act. And so I've got a comment here that this will be more than half the population. So not everybody's going to choose this pathway of self-development. And coming on to science, science itself is going to be raised to the heights of a spiritual creative power in its right place. Not necessarily all science, but science will be, where the spiritual will be into science. At the moment, science is totally materialistic, and there was a reason for it, and it had to be that way. But now the spiritual is going to be put into science. At the moment, as I understand it, everything that will need to be understood by science today in terms of materiality will be understood within 300 to 400 years from today. So this will be a new science where the spirit will be imbuing what the scientific creative power that will come about. Now, everyone's heard of the Bodhisattva or the Buddha. The Buddha, around 500, 600 BC, the Bodhisattva of that time became Gautama Buddha, reached the Buddhahood. And there was a successor, and he's called the Maitreya Buddha Bodhisattva. And this Maitreya Bodhisattva incarnates regularly in the earth, on the earth, in forms that may not be recognized. He would not necessarily be recognized, but he brings blessings to mankind when he comes. He will then achieve the rank of Buddhahood and will become the Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of right mindfulness. Now, Rudolf Steiner says he will speak in a language for which at the moment there are no physical speech organs. They don't exist. But he will speak in such a way that he will have such an effect with his words that this will enable morality to work directly into the souls of human beings. So that would be a blessing for mankind, to help those who have not yet been able to rise to spirituality. So just as Gautama Buddha brought blessings to mankind around 600 BC, and the teachings spread and many good effects occurred through the teachings, same with the Maitreya Buddha in the year 4000 will spread blessings to human souls and help us along. Now, there are no more chances after this, as I spoke. No more chances after this period if you don't choose to raise yourself. As after this period, the conditions will become difficult and totally unsuitable. But then again, there will be those that have chosen spirituality, and they'll be helped along by those who have chosen spirituality. Every attempt will be made to raise those people and help those people to raise themselves. So it's not as though they will be abandoned totally, and this is the last chance, but by themselves, the conditions will become very difficult. And so again, that which is temporary, be permanent. That which comes has to go, and acceptance of this has to be. So we have to accept that our lives will change. It will not be the same. We have to now take our development into our own hands. Now, that's a bit of a summary of Steiner's work. And Neil, how long do I have to go? Do you know how long?
Another 15 to 20 minutes.
Okay. What I want to talk about is to note, I've spoken about Rudolf Steiner's viewpoint of the sixth root race, and I'm going to speak about the lecture given by Beniswa Junov. So this is just the copy Anil sent me, and I just want to comment on it. Now, the first thing you might, I've just noted a few things. The first thing you might note, he calls this the sixth race. And I suppose it can be called the sixth root race or sixth sub-root race, but it isn't the sixth root race. The sixth root race will be after 8000 AD. So just to sort of put that in perspective, where there's, and I got a little bit confused by this as well. Now, he talks about the white race, and it's interesting that he can talk giving birth to the sixth race. And what I think he means by that is that the present impulse for the world, is occurring in America, England, and Europe. And that's all he's meaning about it. So we can talk about cultural groups now, because the meaning of race will disappear, because we're all now being intermarrying, and this will accelerate. And by the sixth root race, we will sort of find that many people, the word race will diminish in meaning. There'll no longer be much meaning to race. It'll now be working with moral principles or not moral principles. And so Deniswa Junoff talks about unlike anything man has ever dreamed, life will be lived in love and people will be dematerialized. This dematerialization will actually occur much later. So it won't necessarily occur in the sixth root race, but the development that will occur will allow people to dematerialize way into the future. And in the seventh root race, it'll be really going downwards, and there'll be real problems in terms of the world and survival. And many people will be able to live what I call in the etheric realm rather than having material bodies. I won't go into that further because I may be digressing there. But he talks about dematerial. And this is where the difficulty of looking at timescales. Now, if Steiner's correct, and I'm not saying he is, they're looking at timescales. They find it difficult as well. These great prophets or initiates also find it difficult to look at this. Everybody in the sixth root race will be different. It is a race of love which will impose the kingdom of God on earth. And what he basically means that people will now be able to look into the spiritual world, those that have chosen to form these communities. So everybody who have, I'm going to put a comma in here, everybody who has chosen the spiritual pathway in the sixth race will be clairvoyant. So I'm going to qualify that of what I think could be there. And he does also talk about that the root race will be going to Russia, where the Slavic people. So it won't be the Russians, it will be also the Bulgarians, maybe the Poles, maybe the other Slavic people. And all that means is where it's going to be centered on. Because if you look at us, even though the impulses have come initially from Europe and America, what they have to offer will have our civilization occurring worldwide. So it doesn't the impulse doesn't have to stay there. It just starts there and spreads worldwide. So this community of brotherhood is going to be centered on the Slavic people. And according to Steiner, he said that's because the soil emanates a certain spiritual force from it, just the location of it. And this can then spread all over the world. So the community of the sixth root race will be spread all over the world, just like we're here now, spread all over Australia and also from India as well. We call it, I just want to get this, fraternization of people, a common brotherhood will be created around the world. And that's kind of important. I don't know if you noticed Russia in its communism had these ideals of sharing, but there was something wrong. They weren't ready for it. it's be another 1,600 years before the Russian people are ready for this, where people can have a common brotherhood and share things. Because at the moment, our egotism is too great. And it doesn't matter where you are. Communism just does not work today. But communism was a real terminology, a real idealistic terminology, which turned out to be evil. So there's a principle in spirituality. Anything from the past, which is brought into the present, will become evil, and anything from the future brought into the present will also be evil. So what it needs is we need to work out for what is appropriate today. So a common brotherhood will be created, and it can only be created in the sixth sub-universe. Man has been gradually elevating to a higher consciousness. And this is important, the next part, that is the self-sacrifice, which shows superconsciousness, life starts to emerge in himself. And that's important. If anybody is going to think that you're going to gain material riches and whatever and things for oneself, that's not the quality of the new race. The new race will be one of sacrifice. And one's going to have to be prepared for this difficulty, but we'll be spiritually mature enough to do this. If you look at the life of Ramana Maharishi, he sacrificed his life and to teach people spiritual principles. And there's a lot of sacrifice. He didn't have a normal life, didn't have a family life, didn't have community, but sacrifice will be required. And that'll be a quality, and that's okay. Now, and the Earth, after 3,500 years on Earth, we'll have a new race, which will have new feelings. Now, that to me is, we can talk about a new race as being a good race and an evil race. Even though the physical bodies, these people that form the community will come from all physical races, what will now be important is your morality or your immorality. So there'll be gradual divisions in people. But when it comes to this thing, the Earth will be 10 times bigger than what we see it now. I believe he's talking about in the far, far distant future, when the Earth gradually dissolves back into the sun. And that will be a time into the future. So this is where I think maybe, and Anil, you might be able to address that later, to say he's talking 10 times bigger. And when people look into the future, time becomes a problem. And that's all I could sort of say. That I know of another person who I have tremendous confidence in, and he's talking about his perception into the future. For him, time is a problem because he gets the events juxtaposed in seeing this. So when we see this, it's not to dismiss this. It's not that it's not true. It's just that it'll be out of time, in a different place. Okay, so again, he's repeating his brotherhood and love. He's also talking about white brothers, meaning, I presume, consist of these white brothers, beings that are discarnate, angelic beings or devas, will now be able to now converse with those that have passed away, but also those hidden forces which support our existence. And that's what I think he'd be referring to at this stage. But the thing is, again, he's repeating that the aim of this sixth root race is to bring about brotherhood and love. And so again, it's repeat. These are the common. So what I try and look at Steiner's work, and I try and look at commonalities of what Vinishwa Juno has. And he's coming up with conditions of fraternization, brotherhood, that builds up. So there's commonality there, so we can see things happening. So the sixth race will save people from perishing. And there's a truth in that. There won't be that many people in terms of the total population. There will be a minority, a larger minority of people that will have taken on spirituality. And so if we go back to history or spiritual history, and we talk about Lemuria, there was much of that continent that was destroyed, and only a few people moved civilization on. The same thing with Atlantis. Much was destroyed, and only a few people carried on the major part of the civilization. And so this sixth root race will produce those that will carry on into the sixth major epoch, people, and the earth will survive in another form. Still the earth, but in another form. So again, love. And what does love mean now for us at the moment? And the way I think love can manifest is we take a true interest in each other, in our differences, and especially with those people who we disagree with. It's not that we love like we love a child or we love our partner, with the opposite sex. Love is really taking a real interest in the other person and feeling where they're actually coming from. And the real test for us is that if you don't like somebody, can you actually enter into their being and find out, really be concerned, where are they coming from? That's a real test of love. And we'll need to develop that into that sixth root race, because we're going to be coming through many trials today. And are we able to forgive those people that cause the anguish for us into the future? And we will come up in trials, and humanity will need those trials and difficulties for us to develop. And this is interesting. He's talking, its members will emit light. And what does he mean by that? Now, Steiner talks about the fact that all our sense organs, when we actually work through morality and all that, and even today, we actually emit a spiritual light. In other words, through our physical body, we emit a light into our environment. And the closest I can come to, if you go past a person with ill intent, you can actually feel something around them. They're emitting something. We might call it their aura. But so, yeah, we will emit a spiritual light. We will be able to perceive it, and we'll have the senses to perceive it. And this is where we're talking about sacrifice. So in the future, when the sixth race comes, people will give more and take less. They will be people of the light. They will take less. Now, this is in total agreement. And what will happen? What Steiner mentioned that today, because we get paid for doing a job, that is one of the problems of being, or one of the obstacles in actually perceiving our karma, receiving quantities of money for work done. In that time, we will receive remuneration apart from our work. There's sort of like a universal income. In other words, we will do work because we see that it needs to be done. We don't expect payment for it, but the payment will come from elsewhere. And just so we can live and exist. But at the moment, when we demand money, or, we demand so many dollars an hour because I'm worth it or that, this presents obstacles to perceiving our karma for today. But eventually, it will be when people will be remunerated for the work done. Like many people here at the moment, they volunteer their time. They get paid elsewhere, and here they volunteer their time because they see that this spiritual work needs to be done. Okay, reason, memory, insight, prudence. As I said, we're going up another level and we'll be developing manas, or spirit self, into the future. Now, here's something interesting, which I think is at the wrong time. But the perfect person gives birth to himself. Now, there's a truth in that, but I don't believe it's going to be in this period that the person will give birth to himself. Eventually, as I said, after this period, women will become infertile and fertility and birth will be occurring. Well, we're already starting with artificial insemination and IVF clinics all over the world. This will become more and more prevalent, but natural birth will cease at the end of this period because the women will become infertile. And Steiner, and I don't fully understand this, but if you look at the larynx and you look at the womb of the female, there's a similarity. And Steiner talks about that in future, people will give birth through the voice, through the larynx. So this fits in. I'm saying I don't understand it fully, but he seems to be in agreement. But I believe that this period is not after the period, but at a much later period, where now talks about Christ says that of water and spirit will a man be born. And this again is in what we call the sixth epoch, which is many thousands of years away, over, maybe 10, 12, 15,000. So he is predicting the future. It's not in this sixth sub-epoch. So this is what I like. So I've been blessed because I can compare the two and realize he is speaking the truth here, but maybe not entirely. Maybe Steiner's wrong, but what he's saying, he sees something, but maybe he hasn't got a time period on. And now this is interesting because this is true. There'll be no nationalism. Even though there might be still evil if I use that, but in another form, the national boundaries will break down. Nationalism, you can sort of see nationalism, maybe Europe is trying to sort of eliminate its borders, and it's starting to. But in the future, there will be no nationalism because, again, people will be mixed. The boundaries in terms of travel will be sort of taken away, and everywhere will be a kind of a worldwide community. So that's something to look at. I actually looked at this and I thought myself, he's talking about the head of a future man will be bald but beautifully shaped. And I thought, oh, am I there already? No, I'm sort of trying to make a joke about that, but I don't know about that one. But I like to think it's true, but anyway. Yeah. So he sees something. I can't tell. The head of a future man will be bald but beautifully shaped, etc. Don't know. He gives certain pictures of faces, and again, don't know, but I'm willing to sit on the fence with this. He says they'll be able to see both in front and behind themselves. And the way I interpret this is, well, we'll now have spiritual sight. It's not as though we will both have the physical sight and the spiritual sight. So we'll be able to perceive all around us. So it won't depend on our physical two eyes. So that could well be the case. They will not worry about sickness. Poverty might come to them, and poverty might come to them. They know how to get distress, sickness, and death to work. They are their masters. There's a truth in this because we will eventually, but in a different way, what we call spiritualize our bodies, and karma will come to an end. So I'm only saying these lines, yeah, maybe, In the future, people will know what their future is. In the future, people will see what is hiding in their brains, in their hearts. They will start processing their feelings. That's actually starting to happen now. Some of you may or may not have had an experience. You will do it. You're prepared to do an action, and you see in front of you the karma that will arise out of the action. And I can testify that I've had that experience, and some of you may have. Steiner talked about that experience, but he's saying now this will be common. So in certain actions, we may actually see our karma, and this will be occurring from now onwards into the future, only that it can become common into the future. So if you do something, you may see the consequences of it, and you're still free to do it. But the thing is, when you see the karma of it, you may say, no, I might not do that. So I think this is great because here Steiner and Denisova Duyunov are sort of coming together. You know, they both agree with their spirit in their spiritual side. So again, clairvoyance into the future, consciousness wide awake. And I think this is important because where we're progressing today is we're becoming more conscious. And that's really what he's trying to say. And we've got to be conscious right down to the physical body, not necessarily control it, but we've got to be able to be more and more conscious. I don't know if when you go into meditation and you go into deep meditation, and then you can actually see those forces clinging to your body, making you stressed, and you're able to peel away each of those forces so your body's perfectly in harmony with the meditative state. I imagine that this is the conscious, wide awake state that he's asking us to achieve. Now, I'm not 100% sure what he's saying here, but he's in a way correct. When a man fully completes his evolution, all his 12 senses will be developed to perfection. So we can, as he says, we can see 5 senses. The 6th root race will have a 6th sense, and there are 6 more latent senses to develop. And Steiner does talk about the same. And he says there are 12 senses, and we can even come to an awareness of them at the moment. One of the senses, Ramana Maharishi speaks about. He talks about self. You can become aware of your sense where there's self in you, where there's awareness. So that's one of the senses Steiner talks about. He calls it sense of ego, but ego meaning spirit or awareness or self. You can actually become aware of that. And so that's one of the senses. So there's more senses to be developed. Now, this is an interesting one. There'll be no carnivorous animals. All conflicts will be gone and parasites will no longer exist. I think Steiner's a little bit different to this. Basically, people will poison the air, as I said, due to our immorality. The air, plant life will die off, and we'll have to produce foods through the laboratory. There'll be no conflicts between the people of the community, but there'll be terrible conflicts with people outside the community, those that haven't made it, those that have gone back to the group souls. And that's important to look at. So, yes, there will be no conflicts. They'll be gone because we will have risen spiritually and we'll be able to see into each other, yet still know that we are different, but we'll be able to become one with each other. And all conflicts will cease amongst us. But with the wider community, the forces of ignorance will be still there. The different community, those that haven't chosen in freedom to take up spirituality. And they will be given every chance to take up spirituality. There'll be every inducement given, but they'll refuse in freedom.
Okay, can we summarize now, John?
Yes, no, I think that's probably enough at the moment. So you can see there's a lot of commonality into the future. And you can see Beneswa Junoff and Rudolf Steiner um, have many points in common, and we should look at both of what the future is. And then if we know what the future is, we can then plan for that today. So thank you, everyone. I'll just stop sharing.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm just wondering, unpin? Okay, you're
All
on.
right. Yeah, thank you, John. So you have given quite a good picture, of where we are actually heading towards. The question is for everyone to grow spiritually, and you see the future is actually fairly bright from what these sages or seers have actually told us. So I'll just ask Vijayji to briefly summarize everything in 5 or 7 minutes, and then we can bring this meeting to a close. Vijayji, you are there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hari Om. I'll just say 3 ohms. Om. 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 Thank you, everyone. Dear seekers in the divine, we are all divinities in action, primarily seeking what we think or have been told we are this or we are that. We just heard um, a good exposition about uh, what Rudolf Steiner and Bianca Diono have spoken about the future, well into the future. And these to us at the moment are concepts that have been laid out, and they may be something that may occur, that would occur in the future, many thousands of years away. But right now, as limited body, mind, intellect beings, individuals, we consider ourselves as this body, mind, intellect. That's all we know, and that is the present. As beings and images in the present, what needs to be done is to be aware of presence right here and now. That is the only goal, and what we need to, each individual who considers oneself as that needs to investigate to find out, because all that we know, all that is known at the moment as an image, is based on the fact that I know that I am. And because of the fact that I know that I am, the consequence has been a superficial layer laid on top of that saying, I am so and so. I am this, I am that. I am Vijay, I am so and so, I am whatever the name is. And when that is laid, immediately after that comes the recognition of other images. So the moment an image recognizes another image, the changing comes into existence. Essentially, taking a step back, I am that pure, absolute, unchanging, changeless awareness. The moment a layer is laid on top of that, I am so and so, this entire edifice that is self created, it's a notion, but it's created. forms this externality of this entire cosmos, this world. Manifestation comes into being as the changing from the changeless. You are essentially that. That is why it was started with dear seekers in the divine as divinities in existence. What is going to happen in the future may happen, will happen, we don't know. But right now, all what is known is I am this. Taking a step back rather than projecting outwards, why not? And as Ramana Maharshi has said, the only goal of this particular existence of this body mind is to investigate, to find out who am I? Who am I? That's the only thing I know I am. So find out who that I am is. And when that investigation happens and one goes deeper and deeper, all this is good for the externality part of it. To know about what's going to happen is very good for the intellectual understanding. But in essence, in the present, to know about presence, the only goal for each individual body mind is to investigate, to find out who am I? Go deep, dive deep into it. That has to be the only goal. Because one is the changeless. One is that supreme pure consciousness. That is that pure awareness. The dharma, they call it the dharma in India. They call it Sanatana Dharma, the eternal dharma. Loosely said, dharma means duty. The eternal duty of a person, of a human being, is to investigate and find out who I am, who am I. When that is done, then all this is known. That is what all the great sages have done. And each one of us, as investigating into ourselves, have to do that to be able to know truth, to understand what this purpose of this very existence is right now, here and now, in the present as presence. So when it is said that, how can the temporary be permanent? That which comes has to go. Acceptance is the key. So that is a beautiful thing, because the temporary can't be the permanent. The temporary is only a changing format of images within that totality of consciousness as the changeless. And what comes as an image has to go. And when it was said that the perfect person gives birth to himself or herself, the perfect person gives birth to himself means you already are perfect. You already are perfect. You are only having the wrong notion upon that I am so and so. That I am so and so is gone. You already are that. So you are only finding out, giving birth to what? To yourself. As the perfect, you already are that changeless. Even here and right now, as long as that wrong notion is gone, there you are, right here and now. It is all a cosmic joke within the format of this changing. It's a play of consciousness. Realize it here and now. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om.
Okay, thank you, Vijayji. That very beautifully summarized from the perspective of the changeless reality consciousness. And thank you, John, as well, for giving us the insight. So we'll bring this meeting to a close. And once again, thank you to all of you for having given your time to have, joined us. Today was quite a deep and a complex topic for discussion. And we'll meet in a month's time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anilji. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.